Thank you, Mrs. Welsh. Thank you, Mr. Tony, and thank you, Mr. Holt, for those very informative presentations. We would have gotten, firstly, an exposure to the open campus model for online training, and then we would have looked at an in-depth review of what is happening in the collaboration between the National Energy Skills Center and Red Deer College in Alberta, Canada. So thank you so very much to all our presenters. I am going to field as many questions as I can in the time slot, so I'm going to move it around a bit, but I would want to start with our last co-presenters. Specifically, I would want to direct my first question to Mr. Holt. So one of our viewers have asked, in light of this new COVID reality where some of the traditional face-to-face learning will now be happening either as an online or blended approach, the question is, what can be said to industries or employers who may be concerned about the level of graduate that is now going to be coming out of that system and the learner's competence? And what techniques can perhaps be borrowed from international best practice in terms of building the confidence of our stakeholders in the industry to still have a sense that we are still providing the checks and balances as far as quality and sound assessment is concerned?
Sure, that's a really excellent question. And I can share with you what we're doing here in Canada. So that's a question that our industries and our employers here are asking of us. And what we've been able to show them is, here is the feedback that our learning management system is telling us about the student's online experience, particularly around the theoretical development of the competencies that they're learning. So our learning management system tells us the level of engagement that each learner has with the content. So it will tell us the amount of minutes that they have spent in the online environment, the number of times they've engaged with a specific learning content, the number of times they've rewatched a recorded synchronous session. It will show us the feedback and engagement that they've had in discussion boards. It gives us a higher awareness of the learning and the testing that we've put into there that helps the employer see a much larger engagement than we've ever been able to provide them in a face-to-face learning environment. Really, in a face-to-face learning environment, we track attendance and we track their assessments. This allows us to actually record and demonstrate their engagement. The second part of it is we have still not replaced the hands-on practical assessment tools. So while we're preparing a large portion of their learning in an online environment, still here through extensive risk assessments and campus mitigation plans, our students will still come back onto campus in very small cohorts, respecting physical distancing, and perform the practical assessments that we then add to the portfolio. So now we're going to give an employer a portfolio that shows here's their engagement in the learning experience and the social learning platform, and here's their practical skills assessment. And our new software even allows us to digitally record some of those practical assessments and upload it into the LMS, so that can be shown to employers as well. So they're not just getting a transcript, they're getting an actual e-portfolio that shows a much deeper understanding of the individual's candidate when it comes to employability.
Thank you very much. Sounds good. So as you were speaking about student engagement, I will throw my next question to Mr. Tony. Your participation rate after your pilot would have been 62%. And in your assessment in terms of the preparedness and the willingness of students, we would have, yes, some candidates would have access to technologies, but some don't. So the question is, what has the NESC has been doing to support those persons who are either on the fringe, you know, they are filtering a bit, whether it's because of access or experience?
So one of the first things we did is we reached out to most of our students. I think we've been very close to 100, been able to contact close to 100% of our students to determine where they were in terms of ability to access our online training. Once we're able to do that, we then offered alternatives in terms of devices. So as I said before, we ensured that the content that they would have been exposed to would have been able to, you could view the content on a cell phone. So any device, once you had a smartphone, you were actually able to access the content. All of our classes are recorded. So a student can actually access those classes beyond, not just at the time that they're being delivered, but after. So the student can go online to access those classes. Now we've also looked at there are students who, no matter what we would have been able to do, were unable to access those classes. As soon as we're given the ability to do so, our computer labs will become available through proper social distancing and through the guidelines that have been outlined by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health. We will allow those students to come in and sit and do those online classes at our campus once we are able to do so. We've not been given the okay to do that as yet, but it is an alternative that we're looking at in terms of students accessing training. Further to that, even if students come back, only can come back in September, a lot of the content they will go through some of that content again so that we can reinforce a number of the points that we would have made through the online classes. The only challenge really is our ability to give those final exams that students have to access. But you will be able to come into the workshops, do the competency training, and then access the theoretical content if you were unable to do so in the online environment. But we have gone to really extreme measures to get as many of our students online. Even though we're saying 62%, you'd be surprised that 62% is not the same students all the time. So we will have covered all of the students, but that average attendance and participation is at 62%.
Okay, so my next question is, in the event that we have restrictions going well beyond September, is it that the campuses have a game plan for how students are actually going to access the workshops to do that practical assignments?
It's really, really difficult to do competence development if you do not have access to the workshops. And I'm not sure that we can effectively do the training if students can't access the workshops. You will be able to cover the theoretical knowledge, yes, but access to the workshop is what really drives that development of competence. And it's not as though the students could do these things at home, because the equipment that you're going to need, the welding machines, the alignment machines, are not available for students just like that. So we will have to look at it if it goes beyond, but in the interim, developing competence has to be done for us in the workshop.
So Mr. Holt, building on that question, one of our viewers are asking if how accessible are virtual simulations in TVET in your environment?
Well, I would say depending on the discipline you're speaking of, it's a vast arrayment. So if you're thinking of, if you look in the world of an electrician, there are lots of augmented reality and virtual reality simulations that can embed into a learning management system that allow a student to engage in VR content online for an electrician. And we use a lot of that in our electrical program. That's very, very effective. And when they do come back to a campus in a safe environment, we've seen through small pilots that transition of the AR and VR training go right into the hands-on. Much different though for something like welding or fabricator, where that's not available. However, there is technology that's available that can be loaned out to students or set up in environments where students can go to centers that are safe, where they can practice on our virtual reality and augmented reality welding systems. That doesn't replace traditional welding, but it does a really good job of helping them develop the fine motor skills, the angle, the inclination, the travel speed, the rate, setting their gas settings, setting up their welder system very well, so that when they do get back to the booth, the welding booth, they're what we're called booth ready. And we've done, for the last 3 years, we've done a lot of pilots, and we've found when we've incorporated the VR and AR technology, which I'll show in a presentation on Thursday, the students transition to the booth much faster. They used less materials when they were in the actual booth, and they were more effective than students who started in a traditional format.
Thank you for that. Ms. Welch, we haven't forgotten you. So I'm going to turn my next question to you. In light of the conversation that would have been happening with our last presenters in terms of ensuring that instructors are prepared for this new technology relevant space where we are going to be using more blended and online delivery and assessment. The question is, are the courses at Open Campus geared towards instructor training, mindful of a competence-based education and training approach?
Yes, thank you for your question. We have incorporated a competency-based approach in our instruction for the online or blended learning teacher education program. And in fact, some of our partners are actually requesting it. So yes, we have to meet the demands that for competency-based training.
So how soon would we expect to see something being, if I can put you on the spot, I mean, are there plans, immediate, near future, long-term goals?
Oh no, we have actually started to implement these training. So it's not something that is being planned. It's something that we have already started to implement. So as I had mentioned before, there are different iterations of the training. So we customize training based on demand, but we do have competency-based instruction already developed, and we would have implemented same.
So in terms, you had mentioned at the start of your presentation that going online increased the access of students who normally may not have been able to be close to your campuses. One viewer was curious to find out whether the profile of your students have changed, whether so beyond the geographic, have you seen more vulnerable and at-risk cohort coming into your program at Open Campus?
We have seen a shift to the younger generation. So before we had a range between 25-year-old to 50-year-old. Now the majority, as I would have observed from some of the courses, the enrollment in some of the courses, there has been a shift to the age group 25 to 35 and even younger. So we have 18-year-olds now enrolling in the courses being offered by the Open Campus. We've always had, more females registering, so that has not changed really. We have more males in recent times being involved in education and training. I think one of the areas we need to strengthen is to include other persons. For example, the online environment can facilitate training of the disabled. And so we need to move more into that. But we have really pushed into developing some very specialized training, for example, for the security and law enforcement industry, the NGO management, and so on. So we do have a wide range of stakeholders who have benefited from the training at the UWI Open Campus.
So our last question for this afternoon going to be geared towards all three of you, because we have the international perspective in Mr. Holt, the regional perspective with Ms. Welsh, and local. So the comment is, adoption of technology generally requires a shifting in terms of the competencies that we will see in course designers and persons who handle assessment methods. Can you clarify what have been the major issues faced in the designing of digital content and assessment for the regional perspective, international, and local? Everything in one. So Ms. Welsh, can you start?
Just to clarify your question, you're asking what challenges have we experienced in implementing training?
Yes, in creating digital content for your environment.
But specific to TVET, of course, there is the financial element because, as would have alluded to earlier, it does require some sort of software simulation, the AR, VR technology. So it does cost to implement these emerging technologies. And so we have been having a challenge trying to access that. Notwithstanding that, we have had some experience using, to a certain extent, some of these new and emerging technologies. But if you're looking at rolling out on a larger scale in the region, we would hope that we will have more involvement of the governments in the region in assisting the TVET programs to be rolled out on a wider scale basis, so that they can involve more practical elements insofar as it relates to persons who do not necessarily have access to a physical facility and would have to come in to or access on their mobile phones. You know, it would require certain equipment, additional equipment. So it does require that financial assistance, which we don't necessarily have that at the moment. And so perhaps this could be a call for the governments of the region to look at assisting us in being more proactive in the approach in rolling out TVET at the higher education level.
Thank you. Mr. Holt.
Really great question, and Ms. Welsh, that's a phenomenal response. From an international perspective and our challenges here, you know, we've got some phenomenal learning designers who have spent years preparing for the future of training, and they're really good at being creative and innovative to design online learning and blended learning programs for competency-based education. Where the challenge comes in is when we now engage instructors who went through their own learning experience of, this is how I learned to be competent in this area. This is how I was taught. And so this is the only way that I think this can be taught. And you get this paradox where they say, this is the only way you can train a welder. There's no way you can train a welder in an online way. And they'll tell you that. And you have to go through a process of shifting their mindset. And so not only do you have a mindset shift from a learning design perspective, but you have a mindset shift from an instructor delivery perspective. And it's really hard to change tradition, really, really hard. Fortunately, this is probably the only good thing that's come out of COVID-19, is that it has forced us to change our mindset. We no longer have a choice to wait. We have to change in order to be viable and sustainable in the future. And so I think, you know, from an international perspective, it's the tools are there, the ability to create an online competency-based education is there. It's the willingness for the institution and our subject matter experts to adopt. And as Ms. Welsh said, the willingness of government to make resources available for institutions to be able to onboard this and take the risks and be willing to fail and fail forward. So not every initiative is going to work. And so in an environment with razor thin budgets and low risk tolerance, we have to be willing to try things and then pull forward the learning experience and crawl, walk, run into this new environment.
Thank you.
And I get to answer that.
Yes. And last but not least.
First of all, the finance, yes, definitely. And I'm also agreeing with Rod in terms of instructors and their unwillingness to adapt to the technology, but it's also about the students as well. The students, we need students who are coming into some of these institutions digital already. Many of the students that come in are really in a place where they're not familiar with technology at all. And it's important to our school systems as well that we have students who are coming through our systems, primary, secondary schools, digital ready, especially those that are going to go into TVET. So those are the most at-risk students, of course, the students who do not have access and are unable to then understand the technology. Because while you may design a particular software that will, for VR or AR, the students who are coming in have to be able to use that technology and understand how to use that technology. So I think one of the things that we also have to look at is our students are not necessarily coming to us digitally, and we have to look at that as well.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your contribution and your responses this afternoon and your patience with us for the little delayed start that we had this afternoon. So, my viewing audience, we have come to the end of the very first day of the National Training Agency's TVET convention, and we hope that you have gleaned some knowledge, some insight, some perspective that you will sit with and marinate on, and perhaps push the margin to continue to explore ways in which we are compelled to evolve in this new reality.